Welcome to Dadograms. Today I'm speaking about a hot topic, that of sending U.S. aid, especially weapons, to Ukraine. It's something people are passionate about despite the fact that most people know next to nothing about why we actually do it. While arguments can be made for or against arming Ukraine, I'm simply telling you 4 fairly obvious and important reasons why we've been doing it. After the first 3, you'll gain a huge appreciation for why we've been arming Ukraine. And as I explain the 4th, well, I will warn you, expect to be shocked and outraged by what I say. But it will be the hard truth of the matter, the truth no one else is willing to speak about. And with that warning, let me tell you who I am. I'm Jason M. Garrett, a retired Navy commander and pilot, and I created Dadograms to teach my kids and all of you how to win in life. And one of the best ways to win is to know the rules of the game we're playing. And in this Dadogram, I'm going to tell you the real reasons we arm nations like Ukraine. Most of us think that the U.S. is arming Ukraine to help a democracy resist aggression. And that may actually be part of it. And it's definitely the part that we put out there for the masses to hear and hopefully accept. But there are other very important reasons why we do it. The first is that it's part of a cycle of modernizing our own military assets. Historically, the U.S. has maintained extensive stockpiles of military equipment, literally sitting on shelves in underground storage facilities and never actually used by us. It's there in case we need it. And all of this stuff over time faces obsolescence or expiration. Eventually, we have to upgrade that inventory, and it's costly to destroy, dismantle, or dispose of the old stuff. So, we send it to an active war zone, which allows it to be used up before it becomes a liability. Now, the first time I ever saw proof of this myself was just after the 9/11 attacks. At the time of the attacks, I was in a squadron that flew the SH-60 Bravo Seahawk. Our job was anti-submarine and anti-surface warfare, meaning we hunted enemy submarines and any surface ships that might threaten our own ships at sea. Looking back on it, those were very primitive times. On my first deployment in the year 2000, night vision goggles didn't really exist, at least not for us in the Navy, meaning that when we flew and landed at the back of our ships, we did it in the absolute pitch black of night, relying on instruments to make our approaches the entire way. And at this time, each helicopter squadron had phased out a missile that we'd used in the 80s and the 90s called the Penguin missile. And we were supposed to get these new upgraded Hellfire missile systems, which included a forward-looking infrared sensor, a Hellfire launch rack, 4 Hellfire missiles, and of course those highly coveted night vision goggles for the entire crew. But on average, there was only 1 Hellfire mission kit per squadron. And since each squadron had about 10 to 15 aircraft, there was clearly not enough to go around. And I can remember being the young lieutenant who wanted to know why. So I asked, why couldn't we get the new weapon systems and the MVGs? And I was told that they were too expensive to make a lot of them and that the Army had the highest priority. Us Navy helicopter pilots were never going to get any of that cool equipment. No way, no how. And you know what? A few weeks after those towers fell, we were all stunned to see a long line of semi-trucks pulling up in front of each squadron. They were filled with Hellfire missile kits, brand new night vision goggles, and these were the high-tech Ambus 9s that we'd only ever heard about but never dreamed of actually having. And we had these gruesome-looking new 50 cal machine guns called the GAU-16 that we had never even considered for our aircraft, but that had apparently been designed, built, and ready for us to fly with. It was just like Christmas morning. Just amazing. Now here's the deal. None of that got created in a week. It had already been planned, designed, paid for, built, and stored, just waiting for us to need it in a real war. And suddenly, there it was, for us to use, for us to hunt down the enemy, for us to fight and win. That's when I realized all this cool stuff had been waiting for a need for years, possibly decades. And I can assure you, as soon as we got it, even newer stuff that was already designed and planned for was given the green light to buy, build, and store for the future. We just needed to use up what was already there first. And that's exactly what is going on right now with all the stuff we've been sending to Ukraine. Remember, for a generation, since 9/11, we have been highly involved in COIN ops. That stands for counterinsurgency operations, where we have had weapons and tactics designed to fight terrorists like Al-Qaeda and ISIS in urban areas, in isolated mountain areas, and so on. But we know that the fight of the future is going to be with a near-peer competitor, most likely China, and we have stuff in the inventory meant for coin operations that we need to use up. So we can bring that new stuff in that we'll need for a large-scale combat operation. That's what's going on here. When we give weapons to Ukraine, we're giving them our old stuff to use up so we can bring in the new for us. That's it. Pure and simple. The next logical reason for giving aid to Ukraine is to see how good our stuff is against a real enemy, especially one as formidable as Russia. This live testing environment allows us to see how good our equipment is against Russia's good stuff. Not only that, but we can study the tactics that work best in employing our weapons against a real enemy, then see how the enemy works to defeat our weapons, and so on back and forth. This is invaluable to us as we seek to develop future weapons and the tactics for using them. Russia has a reputation for making some really good and robust military equipment that we will need to be able to fight and win against if we ever go toe-to-toe with them ourselves. So, this is a way to figure all of that out long before we have masses of real live Americans involved. Consider this example. The Russians have some pretty good tanks. The T-72s, the T-80s, T-90s, and Ukraine was worried about how to handle them. These are advanced models with strong armor and some pretty advanced targeting systems. Well, we sent Ukraine the Switchblade 300 drone. This super cool drone launched out of a mortar tube is then guided downward to hit a tank. Pretty cool, huh? I know I was impressed the first time I'd ever heard about it. A good, clever idea that should have worked great, right? Well, initially it did okay against Russian tanks, but not great. The warhead was too small because it was designed to go against those things that the previous enemy had during coin operations, like going against cars and trucks and so on. So they didn't do that great against heavy armor. But that's all good. That's what we're doing this for. We then brought out the Switchblade 600 for Ukraine to test out for us. It was equipped with anti-armor warheads, and it proved much, much more effective. It was shockingly successful at targeting Russian tanks and even advanced air defense systems like the Tor M2. But then the Russians adapted. They changed things up. They started using electronic warfare interference against our Switchblades. And, well, back and forth, back and forth. Nowadays, Ukraine doesn't even use our Switchblades. They're using cheaper commercial drones equipped with explosives, which have become the common way for destroying Russian tanks as of now. So you see, this is just one simple example of how this works. And we do it for equipment, sensors, logistics, tactics, even strategy, and on and on. So again, giving our old weapons to Ukraine really is invaluable to us as we study and perfect our methods for how to beat Russia or a similar threat on the battlefield of the future. Now, of course, all of this has a downside. It also shows a potential adversary all the ways they need to adjust their own military to be able to handle us, and that is a risk. And that's probably why we keep a lot of what we're developing a secret for a decade or two after we've created and tested it ourselves. So there is that. Okay, the third reason supplying Ukraine is a good thing is we're strengthening our position in the world. When the U.S. sends aid to Ukraine, we're not just helping Kyiv. We're reinforcing our relationships across Europe and far beyond. Nations like Poland, the Baltic states, and even Germany, buddy-buddy as they have been with Russia lately, see Russia as a legitimate threat. When we step up and provide weapons and support, it sends a clear message. The United States has your back. This builds trust, it fosters long-term partnerships, the kind that matter when you're negotiating trade deals, securing access to key resources, or aligning military strategies for future threats. And let's not forget, it's also a very public demonstration of what our weapons and our resolve can do. When our old gear is mowing down Russian tanks and jamming their air defenses, the rest of the world takes notice. Potential adversaries start thinking twice about causing any mischief out there, and our allies feel more secure. And that stuff really matters. Imagine it like this. On the schoolyard, there's a bully throwing punches. When one of the smaller kids stands up and starts fighting back, and everyone sees that he's got a big, strong friend sitting right behind him, that changes the dynamics. The bully doesn't look so strong anymore. And the other kids, they start thinking maybe they're not actually alone either. That's what we're doing. We're changing the dynamic. We're helping Ukraine stand up, and in doing so, we're showing the world that aggression doesn't go unanswered. It builds unity, it deters future conflict, and it positions us, the United States of America, as a friend who shows up when it counts. So you see, When people say we're wasting money overseas, think about this. Every missile, every tank, every fighter jet, every drone we send, it's doing more than fighting in one war. It's securing our alliances, deterring our enemies, and keeping our influence strong across the globe. This action helps ensure peace, not the other way around. Now, all that being said, I personally got some concerns about how we're handling NATO these days, particularly with Trump rattling their cage the way he is. But I hope, and I genuinely mean this, that his brash approach is just his way of pushing our allies to take defense seriously. And in truth, they haven't. They've been way too lax in this area and way too reliant on us. If what he is doing leads to a stronger and more prepared NATO, then this may be a good thing. But if he really is intent on burning bridges we'll need in the next fight, well, that's probably a deal that's not going to help us win in the future. Okay, so now for number 4. And remember, I warned you, this is not what most people are going to want to hear, but it's the truth. By supplying Ukraine with weapons, we are fighting Russia in a proxy war that has effectively eliminated Russia as a serious threat to any invasion of Europe for at least the next generation, and likely forever. How? Without the U.S. having fired a shot, Western sources have estimated that we have helped cause more than 300,000 Russian casualties, with somewhere around 120,000 deaths of Russia's young men on the battlefield. And as a bonus, if you want to consider it that, around 900,000 of their most highly educated and skilled men have fled the country to avoid being conscripted or to ensure their own safety. By supplying weapons to Ukraine, we have bled Russia nearly to death. Most folks don't know this, but Russia is dying. Its population has been declining for a long time, arguably since 1990 when the Soviet Union collapsed. And while it stabilized for a time in the early 2000s, it has accelerated its decline recently due to COVID and, of course, this war in Ukraine. It's so bad the projections show Russia's population could contract by 50% by the year 2100, just 75 years from now. In the far east parts of Russia, the population is so thin, the Chinese have started to allow their citizens to settle in areas that were considered Russia, as the borders between the two in that area are somewhat vague and hard to define anyway. It comes down to the old adage, possession is 9/10 of the law, and the Chinese know it. If the Chinese are established on this property and the Russians don't have any Russians there anymore, well, you see how it goes. Russia loses territory, slowly at first, but over decades, the territorial shift really adds up. And they feel the contraction in the western part of the country as well. In fact, little known to most, part of the reason Russia moved into Ukraine was a population grab. They need more people, more breeding stock. And this area of Ukraine already spoke Russian, had strong Russian ties, and had a warm weather port, so what the hell? Just take it, right? Well, if the costs were low, it might have been worth it. But we stepped in with the weapons and gave Ukraine a fighting chance, and it has bled Russia badly. There's a concept you may have heard of. It's called a Pyrrhic victory, a term that originates from King Pyrrhus of Epirus, who defeated the Romans in the battles of Heraclea in 280 BCE and Asculum in 279 BCE. But when he beat the Romans, he suffered such heavy losses that he could not continue the war. In fact, he lamented afterwards that another such victory could utterly undo him. A Pyrrhic victory is a win achieved at such a cost, whether in resources, lives, or effort, that it effectively feels like a defeat due to the long-term consequences. Well, it looks like with the help of President Trump that Putin may be able to consider his efforts in Ukraine a victory of sorts. But let me assure you, it's a Pyrrhic victory, because ultimately, Putin has lost Russia the war. They say when it comes down to strategic planning that Americans think as if we're playing a game of checkers, a very simple game for very simple-minded people. And the Russians think multiple steps ahead because they play chess, a much more intellectual game. Oh, and by the way, they say the Chinese play the game of Go, a complex game associated with wisdom and culture. Well, ladies and gentlemen, in the case of Ukraine, it was just a simple game of checkers between us and Russia. And the surprising part wasn't how good we were, the United States, at playing the game of checkers. It was how bad Putin was at playing against us. Just shocking that he would throw it all away the way he has. And what now? Well, we've depleted our reserves, gotten rid of all that old coin ops equipment, and we're tooling up for the next real war. Now we're looking to stop bludgeoning the Russian bear, backing away from Ukraine, and keeping the new stuff for ourselves. And we're encouraging Europe to stand on their own, and I think they will. They'll probably be able to do that in a few years, especially considering that they've already started to take their defense a little more seriously. And of course, now that the Russian bear has been defanged and declawed. Still dangerous, mind you. It can still throw its weight around, but it's probably not as dangerous as it once was. Now we're looking toward the next big competitor out there, and I'm betting we'll be more than ready when the time comes. But we'll have to see how that goes. The things I'm worried about is whether we truly alienate our allies across the globe or not. Because if we're gearing up to do what I think we're going to do next, we're going to need them. Trust me on that, we're going to need our allies. Anyway, to wrap this up, providing aid to Ukraine isn't just about being the world's police or playing the hero in someone else's fight. It's smart strategy. It's about preparing for future threats, strengthening our military, and securing our place in the global order. By sending aid to Ukraine, we're modernizing our military by using up older equipment and by building and storing the next generation of weaponry and tech for the fight of the future. We're testing our weapons and our tactics in a real-world environment against a serious adversary. We're building geopolitical influence and reinforcing our alliances in key regions, and showing would-be adversaries out there just how good we are at the business of warfare. And we're bleeding a major adversary without sacrificing American lives, and that will reshape the strategic balance for decades to come. And now, you know the real reason. Not the headlines, not the talking points, but the strategic logic behind the moves we make. All right, ladies and gentlemen, if you've watched this far, go ahead and subscribe to this channel and hit that thumbs up button and all that cool stuff. Until next time, keep paying attention, keep asking why, because the better you understand the games we're playing, the better you'll be at winning them.